And it's live. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming live to today's LinkedIn Live. And if you're listening to this as a podcast recording, thank you for listening to Nonprofit Nation. We're going to repurpose this as a podcast recording as well. So today, what is happening? It's January 31st as of this recording. I really wanted to have my friend Bethany Snyder on to talk to me, to kind of talk me off a ledge, talk all of us hopefully off a ledge, but give us some real tips on how to navigate the crises, the chaos, the gaslighting, the whiplash, kind of the constant state of despair that a lot of nonprofits have been in, and just confusion, even if you're not in despair, just confusion about where to turn, what's really going on, how to react, how to communicate, all of these questions I've been seeing on social media, I've been seeing in my inbox. And Bethany, I know you have too. So just a really, really quick intro for Bethany, if you're not familiar. Bethany is the founder of Snyder Strategies LLC, a boutique consulting firm she formed to share and leverage her deep understanding of the advocacy world with nonprofit and membership-based organizations. She's been on all sides of the advocacy desk as a grassroots advocacy director, a lobbyist, a consultant, a comms director, and a U.S. Senate staffer. And having worked for a range of organizations, she's passionate about ensuring that nonprofit and social justice organizations use their voices and expertise to influence policies that impact those most in need. Are we taking a breath? How are we doing? First of all, how are we doing? How are you doing, Bethany?
Yeah, well, it has been a week. I can't believe it's Friday. I felt like Wednesday was Friday.
I really felt like Wednesday was Friday, and I wanted January to be over.
This week has lasted many, many months. But first of all, how I want to kind of provide context to this is that the goal is for us to be in chaos. That is the goal.
Not our goal.
No.
But the administration's goal. That's not our goal, but
the goal of all these executive orders, the goal of how they're rolling out the memos to implement them, it is to sow chaos and wreak havoc, so we can't keep our eye on the ball. So if everyone's feeling that way, I just want you to know you're not alone. That's intentional, and that this is what the purpose is. So just to give a little bit of background on the timeline that we've had. So I'm going to be referring to some documents over here on my other screen if you see me looking.
Yeah, sure.
So last week, the White House put out a slew of executive orders. Now, what's interesting about executive orders is they are I call them like a gray area of the law or gray area of policy. There are some things that the White House and the executive branch can definitely do through executive order. But then there's other issues, and I think this administration is testing the boundaries of this, that we have not seen, creating executive orders on things they intend that should be policy, or they intend to be policy, because executive orders only last as long as as that administration, and typically the next administration can keep the executive order or rescind it. And so we've seen, in addition to these executive orders, we saw the rescission of many executive orders as well. So I just want to throw that out there. And so with the executive orders, it's kind of, again, it's a gray area of the law. Some things the executive branch can do through executive order and some things they can't. Like, for example, they talked about on NPR this morning, giving federal workers the option to quit next month and be paid through September.
It's insane.
That is unprecedented. We don't know. Can the executive branch do that with any congressional oversight or approval? We don't know.
Right.
But the point is, what I think we should take from these executive orders is that this is the intention. This is the intention of the administration. And if these executive orders stay or don't stay, these are policies that we're going to see introduced.
Okay. So that's very important, I think, because I think a lot of people might not be as familiar with executive orders versus like a policy or a law passed by Congress.
Right.
And so what you've seen, and I think what I've seen also in other administrations, is that these, if they are not a law passed by Congress, this is an intention set. This is sort of
Yes.
like a shot across the bow. Like this,
Mhm.
we want this to happen,
Mhm.
whether or not it can happen as an executive order. We want to make this happen. Is that what you're seeing?
I'd say absolutely. I'm not sure if other administrations have used it that way, but definitely this is how we're seeing this administration use it. So,
Mhm.
like I like to tell people, this week we won, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the
Yes.
first battle of a very long game. This is just the beginning, not the end of what's going to be happening. So that probably makes you more anxious. Or you're like, what? I thought we got this injunction. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this is going to be how we're going to be doing. We need to be preparing to do things and seeing things come out from this administration. And that's what we want to be here to talk about, is how can you prepare? So we're going to see a lot of things be thrown at us, but as long as you have like a plan and you're prepared, and we do that over and over again, then you will feel a little bit more at ease and be able to weather these, tough storms.
So let's talk about, I do want to talk about
Mhm.
your formula, prepare, respond,
Yeah.
advocate, but I want to talk about the funding freeze. You had
Mhm.
nonprofits of all sizes and all spectrums and all
Mhm.
verticals really scrambling.
Yes.
And so what happened? Maybe some of us saw headlines. I'm sure we saw
Mhm.
on LinkedIn. We saw maybe our executive director was talking about it. I didn't see
Mhm.
communications from nonprofits about it,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
that's the big headline this week.
Mhm.
Can you give us some context around that? What
Yeah.
happened and what are the implications for
So
nonprofits?
last week, the Trump administration put out a slew of executive orders, and I'm going to we'll share some links. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if I put a link in the chat here, if it will go to.
If you put it in StreamYard, I can send it
Okay,
to
great. Yeah.
LinkedIn.
So I'm going to put a link in the chat from the National Council of Nonprofits that lists all the executive orders, and they're keeping this up to date and tracking it. So,
Oh, I have that link too. I will
yeah.
get it. I'll put it in the
So
chat.
when you put out an executive order, that's kind of stating this is what we want to happen. But then the OMB is kind of the implementation of that order, right? And so while we saw this executive order around DEI happen the week before, when it was the OMB memo that came out that said, okay, to implement this executive order, this is what we need the agencies do. We want them to freeze funding starting at 5:00 tomorrow. They'll freeze funding for 90 days as they answer these questions that we have to make sure that they're meeting the administration's policy priorities. So that's why people are like, well, we have these executive orders already. So why do we have this other piece? So it's the OMB memo that implemented it or told the agencies what to do about the executive order.
Mm.
And then what happened is the National Council of Nonprofits and some other some small organizations around small businesses, they filed an injunction on Wednesday to temporarily halt the funding freeze. And so, but what it halted was the OMB memo. The executive order still stands.
Okay.
So again, this is a lot of gray area. And so we're not sure, and the courts will weigh in on that. We're not sure if they can act fast enough, that we'll need. But that's where we're at right now. A judge is going to hear the case on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, the administration can appeal, and then we can appeal. There's going to be all of that going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we'll get a longer injunction while they're working this through the courts. That's what we're hoping for. So then again, so then they just don't halt funding freeze. They don't freeze funding while they're looking at these questions they want to look at. So each agency has 90 days to look at these questions, and I can share the questions that we got. I'll put that link in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen these kind of questions circulating several times, so I'm pretty confident that this is accurate. And so these are the questions that the agencies are tasked with saying, okay, when they look at a program, asking those program heads, hey, does the program have any pending funding announcements, et cetera. So what we're saying is while you're doing that, let's keep these programs funded, right?
Yes.
Let's keep them going while you do the 90-day review.
Okay.
Again, that puts us in limbo maybe in 90 days on what's going to happen, but at least it gives us all some breathing room. And, then it gives organizations an opportunity to do some of these things we're going to be talking about. Because when the memo came down, even though they said it was going to be all funding was going to be shut down at 5, we heard that portals were shut down at noon. People couldn't draw down, community colleges couldn't draw down their federal fund.
Yep. I've already heard people saying grants were canceled, things like that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's already been impacts of this.
And chaos is the intended impact
yeah.
at the end of the day.
So that's where we are right now. There is an injunction until Monday. A judge is going to hear it. Again, hopefully we want them to, our goal is to have it be longer, hopefully around this 90 days. So that's where we are right now.
Okay.
Like I said, if you want to look at the specific executive orders that are out there, you can look at that NCN one. But the ones that people are most concerned about is the DEI one. I mean, I wouldn't say no one's concerned about it. I think the ICE one is also really disturbing and having chilling effects in our communities. But when it comes to nonprofit, and then obviously there's LGBTQ ones, targeting trans people, and those are also in that chart. But when it comes to like the specific nonprofit sector ones, it's the DEI ones that we're really tracking, and that's what the freeze was about. So they can look and see that we're not spending government money on these programs that we don't agree with, or the administration doesn't agree with.
So there's a lot to unpack here. So what are the implications if these executive orders do go through? I mean, millions and millions of dollars that go to organizations that are the safety nets of our entire country will be affected.
Yeah. And the Trump administration continues to say this does not impact direct payments to individuals. So Social Security, Medicaid and Medicare, which actually aren't direct, payments to people, but they provide healthcare, SNAP, et cetera. Those things aren't impacted. But then you think about a Head Start program. That's not a direct payment to a family. But if they can't pay payroll and can't have teachers, those families don't have childcare, right? And
that affects their ability to go to work.
Exactly. Or we heard about an organization in Iowa who coordinates our homeless system, and they were not able to process payroll. And they're like, we're gonna have 140 workers who won't get paid. That's going to impact them. And then the ability of the system that helps provide shelter for unhoused folks, that's going to dismantle, right? So while I know the administration is trying to ease people's concerns, saying direct payments to individuals are not impacted, these programs touch all people's lives, all aspects of their lives, right? From food support to housing to healthcare to scientific research to domestic violence shelters to childcare.
To Veterans Affairs, to elderly housing. I mean,
Small Business Administration. Small businesses. So it can have devastating effects. But what I think the opportunity is for us here is, and I agree, the nonprofit sector has not done a good job of sharing how awesome we are, right? We're our least best cheerleader.
We don't want to pat ourselves on the back. We just want to put our heads down and do the work. But then when something like this happens, people don't understand how vital we are to day-to-day life.
Yes, exactly. And so one of the things we've been talking about is, so when someone, so the first thing, let's talk about like the things that I talked about in my blog post, which is how do you prepare for this, for this fight, right? So first is like a fortifying your organization, right? Is like, staying informed and educating your team. I highly recommend, if you are not following or not a member of your state nonprofit association, become one and follow them. They are, as one person said this week, doing the Lord's work of fighting back, putting out information, and helping their nonprofit members really weather these times. So that's the first. So follow the National Council of Nonprofits, find who your state association, your state nonprofit association is, and sign up for their emails. If you can become a member, that's even great because they need money to do this work, et cetera. So first is stay formed. Look at those executive orders. Think about how they could impact you. Obviously, we've been hearing diversify your resources, your funding. I mean, you can't do that in like 8 hours or even maybe sometimes in 90 days. But I think being really transparent with your donors about what's happening is critical. We just saw in the Twin Cities when Target took away, decided to DEI programs, the Twin Cities Pride said, fine, we're not going to take your money anymore. So it's a little bit different. And they went to the community and they were able to replace that $50,000 in 24 hours.
Yes.
So I think being really transparent with your donors about this is what's going on. You can say we're uncertain. We are in uncharted waters. And I think that's okay to say. You do not have to have all the answers, but you can say the one thing we do know is that we need your support.
Yep.
And we need your help.
Exactly.
Right.
So I agree. And I have 2 examples that I
Mm-hmm.
want to share. I think I can share links from organizations that I received emails from just in the last 2 days
Mm-hmm.
that were very open saying,
Mm-hmm.
look, we receive, 75% of funding for this particular program is
Mm-hmm.
from a grant that could be affected or from funding that
Mm-hmm.
could be affected. And we just want to let you know that we're committed to this program, but we need your help and we might need you to step up. And,
Mm-hmm.
the way you could do this is be a recurring donor. I'm
Yep.
not saying you have to send out a fundraising appeal, but I think what Bethany said is true. Being open and honest with your donors that this is happening and this could affect the delivery of services and the
Mm-hmm.
impact you're creating.
Absolutely. And I think I always have a bias towards action, which sometimes isn't always great, but I think which is sometimes a bit me.
No, it's great.
But silence breeds more confusion and more anxiety.
Yes.
But when you
Yes.
put out a statement, we don't know what's going on yet, but this is what's going on. People like that. They want to hear that. They want to hear that you are thinking of them and you're thinking about it and you've got it, even if you don't have all the answers right now.
Mm-hmm.
I like to remind folks that the nonprofit, while our trust in information sources has drastically decreased over time, people still trust their nonprofits that they donate to. There's still trusted sources of information. So people, and this is one of the things that we don't want to lose, right?
Yeah.
In this chaos. We want still people. So yes, be transparent, engage your donors.
Mm-hmm.
Another one to prepare is we're going to be talking a lot about advocacy strategies. This is going to involve advocacy. Get your folks trained, get yourself trained, get your staff trained on what advocacy looks like for your organization and how you can engage in it. This is, I know sometimes we're doing the good work of feeding people, but we all need to step up now. And your organizations are who lawmakers need to hear from the most.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can hear from consultants all day and
Yes.
lobbyists, but they really need to hear from people in the trenches on the ground doing the work. I totally agree.
Absolutely. And so next, my second step is responding. So what are you doing? We talk about you can issue a public statement, mobilize a rapid response. I actually just put on my website yesterday, and I will share this in the link, sample rapid response template for your organization. It's really generic. And so here, I'm going to grab it right now. I haven't even sent it out on my email list yet. So you're the first to get it.
Yay.
Yeah, it's a nonprofits must be ready, rapid response planning for success. And this is something my organizations, we got caught, left-footed on this. We didn't have a rapid response plan. And this is something I always tell people outside the legislative session when session isn't, and they're like, what can we do? I was like, you can create a rapid response plan right now. Yep. So create that rapid response plan. When something happens, who's making the decision? Who's looking at the draft? Who do you need to consult with, right? Have that all laid out beforehand so you're not struggling in the moment like I was this week with some of my organizations that I work with. So that's a template there that's pretty generic that you can use. It's like a 5-step plan. And then think who do we need to tell? Do we need to tell our board first? Do we need to tell, as executive committee, the board, staff, then our stakeholders? Just think through all those things, so then again, when this happens again, you won't be kind of caught off guard. Provide emergency support for your community. Again, engaging these donors. If I want to call out to all the foundations who might be anyone from a foundation that's listening, if you can provide rapid response grants, right now is the time to do it. Yes. Get those 1-page applications ready that will not take 16 hours to create, and ask your grantees, what do you need from us right now? How can we help you? Yes. And I want to talk about a webinar I was just on that was hosted by the National Council of Nonprofits, but it was really for the National Council of Philanthropy. And
that was today. And was that about how to respond to these things?
Yes. And one of the, of course it was a lawyer who was I understand I'm married to a lawyer, so they have to talk about risk all the time. But one of the things they talked about was scrubbing your website of DEI.
I don't know. I would want to
I
do
don't,
that.
I mean, of course, that is the most risk adverse thing you could do. I'm not sure that's going to help our sector. And I'm
No.
not sure that that's going to help the communities most in need. And I think, and I brought this up, I was like, what about organizations that are LGBTQ, that serve LGBTQ people, or the Latino
Yeah.
food shelf, or the Black led organizations? They can't scrub their websites.
Mm-hmm.
Their whole mission is serving
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable and marginalized populations. So, but I think having those conversations with your board and your leaders about how bold you want to take, and I'm going to encourage you to be as bold as you can. That is a conversation to have when you're going through this rapid response plan.
100%. 100%.
Um,
Okay. Oh
yeah.
yeah. So now we're still on respond.
Well, you respond, then we're going to move on to advocate. So
Okay.
yeah, this is where we're going to build partnerships. We're going to push back. Who are those other folks in your community that you can rely on? So I work with the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance, and I thought, let's get a call of all the red rural small states. Right, our needs are way different than Minnesota or Oregon or Maryland, right, or California,
Mm-hmm.
and so I want to get us together so we can talk as leaders on like how are we working within the unique environment that we're in certain states. So I'm already thinking like who I'm getting on calls with the Iowa Council of Foundations. Okay, how are we going to work together? So be thinking about who are those partnerships you need to build or tap into, and then have a conversation. How do we want to work together? Do we want to respond together? I think like some organizations are going to go further than other organizations, and that's fine. But just having that conversation and letting them know we're going to take this as far as we can. I understand if you're can do more behind the scenes stuff, but just have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then again, engage lawmakers at every level. The one thing this thing has taught me, this fire drill this week, and we already knew this, lawmakers do not understand the nonprofit sector.
No.
And we already knew this. We know this every single day, but it definitely came to head this week.
Yeah.
So take a time to reach out to your local lawmakers and say, I want to tell you about our organization and how we receive funding. And when people ask, how do you receive funding? We can't just keep saying it's complicated. You have to come up with something. Like, even if it's like 1/3 comes from individual donations, 1/3 comes from grants, and 1/3 comes from federal funding, or this program is federal funded. Just, I think a one pager on that, and just educating lawmakers and the public and stakeholders about how you're funded and the symbiotic relationship between government and the nonprofit sector.
Yes.
Nonprofit sector does the work of the government, right?
Yep.
And
we're the safety net.
We are the safety, and I think it's a good thing. Our communities are on the ground. We're closest to the people most effective. We can provide care and services in a culturally competent, community-based way, right? You want that person you see at the grocery store helping you out, not, some government bureaucrat, right? I think, and that's the way the system works great. And it works great when we have mutual respect for each other. And so that's one of my main takeaways when I'm talking to our lawmakers here in the state of Iowa is this relationship is symbiotic. We rely on each other. And in order for this to work, we need to work together. And these kind of things are not helpful, like what just happened this week.
Exactly.
So I think that's so important. So if you can have a conversation with your local lawmakers or your state lawmakers, just to explain to them about your organization, how, and this is not lobbying because you're not asking for a bill.
No, you're just explaining to them how it works.
You're just educating.
Facts.
Exactly. And then lastly, of course, invest in long-term policy change, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we create more equitable systems, and we're seeing where we already knew where the gaps were. This week has just highlighted them and illuminated them. And so now I think hopefully longer term, we can work on filling those gaps and making sure that I think we can come out as a stronger nonprofit sector after all of this. I have hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to just address some of the questions that I have received and some of the conversations that I have had with my clients, because clearly you and I are very much on the same page. Anyone that has spoken to us, talked to us, been on a training with us, listened to us talk, looked at our backgrounds of our office, clearly understands that we're very pro advocacy and speaking up for what's right and what's not right, and just very pro speaking up for the communities that we serve and at the nonprofit level. But what about pushback from our board and our donors? And what about a board that says, oh no, we can't delve into politics? And
right. Well, one thing we want to remember is that in the eyes of the IRS, politics, big P, is candidates,
Yep.
political parties, and elections. None of this we're talking about has to do any with that.
Exactly.
Now, of course, things have been politicized, right? Things I would have never thought would be politicized: masks, vaccines, the word DEI, right? But we can't play into their handbook. We can't now take that on and us say this is political. It's
Right.
not.
It's not.
Vaccines are not political. Masks are not political. Equitable practices are not political. We know that they improve the lives of our communities when we have equitable practices, when we know that. I mean, we just see this. I just think of like the Small Business Association. That's why they have programs geared at veterans and women and people with disabilities, because they are disadvantaged, but they know that the more we have those sorts of small business owners, the better our communities are served, right?
Exactly.
And another thing we need to think, we can't fall into the trap of defining DEI as they are. We need to say, this is what DEI means to our organization. This is what it means to be diverse to us. It means serving with integrity and with value, whatever that looks like. But I would say, I would push back and say, we don't need to fall into their trap and start using the master's language. We can create our own language around this and educate around it.
I completely agree. Like, let's own the language. And also, I think what I would love to implore to them, which I do say all the time, is that no matter what you do, someone is going to push back on it.
Absolutely.
Whether you're saving kittens or you are helping, it doesn't matter. Like, really, anything, libraries, museums, arts organizations, research, domestic violence, there's always going to be pushback. But at what point do we stand up and say, no, this is what we stand for? This is what we're doing. This is what we believe in. And we're willing to stand up for what we believe in. And we deserve funding. We need to get more funding. I think what's so interesting about the call you were on today, I would love to ask you, and you talked a little bit more about it, but how can funders, philanthropists, and foundations really be responding to this as well? And what's our sort of call to them to be more proactive in this space?
Yeah. I mean, the people with the purse strings have the most power. And so again, I would encourage any foundation or funder or donor on this call to be thinking, how can I fortify and strengthen this organization? What can I do to help them so they can weather the storm? Now, not talking about DEI or equity is not going to help organizations not weather the storm.
Right. Just brushing it under the rug and pretending it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And the thing is, we know if you capitulate, they're not going to be like, oh, great, they did what we said. No, they're just going to keep moving the goalpost back and back. This is not like, oh, great, they took DEI off their website. Now we're not going to target this org. No, that's just the first step, right? So we can't then how many steps down do we now decide to stand? Like how you said, do we decide? This is, I think that's a very slippery slope for organizations to think about. But if you can start talking about, this is what diversity means to our organization. This is how we practice it. Just start. I think education is the number one thing we need to do right now. It's clear. We've always known this. People do not understand the nonprofit sector. And so we need to do better about educating them. And I think foundations can help with that. Foundations have a very strong voice. They can be doing a lot of this work and talking about how important the nonprofit sector is. They can put out those one-pagers on funding, right? These people are already working to feed people and house people. The foundations can create a one-pager. They have brains, as my mom used to say, their hands aren't painted on.
Yeah, their hands aren't painted on. What an amazing saying.
Right? Why?
I'm going to start saying that to my kids, by the way.
Your hands aren't painted
on.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I would love to see our foundations here putting out, this is why the nonprofit sector's and putting out those one pagers, and then we just use them, right? We can tweak them and use them for our own. But I think that would be great and a great role for our foundations to do.
I agree. And foundations often have pretty powerful movers and shakers on their boards. in their donor file. They have connections
Mhm.
with businesses, people that are definitely not on the ground, or might not
Mhm.
be as close to
Mhm.
the work. So I do see education as a huge, huge piece of this. And I've always thought that. So I guess one other thing I wanted to ask you,
Mhm.
how can we stay informed while maintaining our mental health? Like, do you have any
Yes.
tips for us? Because I know so many people on this call and on this LinkedIn Live and listening to the podcast,
Mhm.
that's something they're really struggling with right now.
Well, and it's hard because you're like, I'm already dealing with this already tough situation of, again, feeding people, housing. These aren't always easy days already, right? And now, like, you're adding this to my plate.
Mhm,
Again, I would say look to your state association, find out what they're doing, sign on to their communication channels. Most of them are
mhm,
holding some sort of call this week and next week with their networks. Try to jump on that call. The National Council of Nonprofits is holding a big national call on Friday. The registration link isn't live yet, but as soon as it is, I'll make sure Julia knows. I think it's
yes.
from 2 to 3 Central.
That's next week,
Um,
next
yes,
Friday?
next Friday, yep, on the 7th. And so that's an opportunity if you miss your state's call, or if your state hasn't, like Iowa, we haven't gotten one together yet, but we're in the process of it. Join that call. They're not going to be taking questions, but you can just like sit and hear. They're kind of go
Mhm,
through what's happening from a really big picture level. Yeah, and I think obviously some of those really basic things, call your program officer at
mhm,
the agency, talk to them, find out what they know, call your grantors and say, hey, did you know that this whole program that we do is federally funded? Is there a way that can we get some emergency funding in case it goes away? Start having those conversations now. So
yeah,
then in 90 days, and who knows, this administration doesn't really keep to its word. They could do something in 45 days, right? We don't really know. So
mhm,
that's what I'd be doing now is getting information, putting together information as well. So I think
mhm,
you guys getting information, but then gathering information so you can really educate your community as well.
mhm. How should we be communicating right now? And I know we should be, but I do see a lot of, especially maybe smaller organizations, feeling like there's so much clutter. There's
Mm,
so many things.
mhm.
People are so overwhelmed with information right now.
Yeah.
What are some strategies you have for maybe how we can communicate with our donors, with our
Yeah.
stakeholders?
Well, obviously people are using social a lot. I think the one challenge with social, and you know this, Julia, so
Yeah.
that's your bread and butter, is that not everyone's going to see that message that
Hmm.
the powers that be and the algorithms that be, but email communication is the number one way to get directly at your folks. So if you have an email
Hmm.
list, I think you can say, we know there's a lot of noise, we know there's a lot of
Acknowledge it.
yeah, just acknowledge it and say we're working through it too, but just so you know, we're here, this is what we do know, maybe this is what we don't know, but we are keeping on top of it. I think being transparent like that is really will help put people at ease.
I love it. Oh my gosh, this has been amazing. Oh, Lisa asked on LinkedIn the three big P's for the IRS considerations as political. I don't know if I
Oh,
know that.
so that's political parties, political candidates, and elections. That's what we call the three big P's, right? Those are things that like not 501(c)(3)s can't do. You can't say, but all these other things we consider political, I call them small p political, right?
Mhm,
Like LGBTQ people's lives,
mhm. Or
and
just yeah, exactly.
vaccines and masks. I used to use the example of fire hydrants. I was like, someday maybe fire hydrants become political. I don't know.
I'm sure
Um,
they are. They probably are.
it might be. I bet they're federally funded, but
Oh my gosh.
right?
Mhm. Oh, everything is
Um,
political, it doesn't matter.
right. And so, but you don't fall into the trap of defining what's political by our opponents, right? These are
Yes,
people's
yes,
lives. People are not political and beings.
yes.
Um, and so just remember the big three P's are you just can't say anything about political parties, candidates, which are not really any kind of active campaigns, especially you have special elections happening in your community, and elections.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's what I really think is so important about advocacy. We talked about this when you've been on my podcast a couple of times, and this
Mhm.
is something that I just want to really drill home for nonprofits is that you can talk about current events. You
Mhm.
can say, we lost this grant, or we are scared to lose this grant, or we are really scared about the implications of this law on the constituents and the people that we serve. That is not going to violate your 501c3 designation. It really is if you say, anything about an election, or like you just said, a candidate. But I do think really making, pretending that these things don't exist is not going to build trust, and it's not going to build community. Our donors and our supporters and stakeholders, they turn to us to be the go-to resource on the issue that they care about, the problem that they want solved. And when I hear just sort of radio silence from organizations that I know are working on issues that I care about, that are in the news, that I don't have the time to be on the forefront of every single headline and every single everything. So I really do trust the nonprofits to do that. I think we're doing a disservice being silent.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, it makes people more anxious. It doesn't make them feel comfortable with silence, right? It just makes them more anxious. They just want to know, we've got it, we're following it. We'll let you know when we know more.
It sort of was like in COVID. Do you remember when there was like radio silence from so many nonprofits? And I thought, this is something that actually is happening universally, like all around the world. And I kind of want to know. I want to know what's happening. I want to know how it's impacting you. I want to know what I can do, like most importantly, as a donor and as an advocate myself.
Absolutely. And I'd say, like, I know, also go see what is in your queue to be sent out in your emails. I've gotten a couple tone deaf emails today where I'm like, why are they sending this? This is a weird thing to send out today, considering all that's going on in the world. But I'm sure it was scheduled like last week, right? So I'd say go back and look at your queue and be like, does this seem like the right time to send this right now? Yeah.
Oh, well, this is an interesting question. I don't know the name, but it's Boss Coaches. Would it be okay to post an open letter to the president regarding DEI on our website?
Well, that's interesting. We are writing, so some of the organizations I work with are writing letters to our federal delegation, just, hey, we're, this is our organization. This is one, just want to tell you more about us. Since obvious, you don't know. You're confused. It's not going to say that. It's going to be very nice. But we're going to post that on our website, definitely, because I want to make sure that if people want to replicate it, that's another way to educate the public. So I wouldn't necessarily send one to the president. I think the more effective strategy is really your state lawmakers and your federal lawmakers.
Exactly. Oh, great. And I think you could just make an open statement about how you feel about DEI. Like,
absolutely.
This is how we feel about it. This is our policy, and this is what we're going to do.
Yep. And I know some people are saying that that's going to put targets on backs. That's what kind of the gist of this webinar I went to. But this is the thing. There's organizations already with targets on their backs, right? That can't get the targets off their backs. So again, this isn't going away. I think bolder action is what we need. And I think people of privilege need to take the boldest action. And the ones who don't have the targets on their back yet, because you've heard this, they came for the blah, blah, blah. And then there's no one left to save me. We've all heard that, Yeah. So I would definitely, instead of doing one to the president. Oh, another thing I was going to say, I've seen a couple organizations in my community do this, and I really loved it. It's like an open letter. So the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance did an open letter to Iowa's nonprofits, just saying, we got this.
Oh,
we love you.
That.
We are thinking about you. We know it's been a tough week. Like, it's an open letter to Iowa's nonprofits. And I've seen that our LGBTQ organizations send one to the LGBTQ community. Like, these executive orders that came back from Trump, they're devastating. We know it's impacting you as a community. We're going to do all we can to fight against them. So I also think that's something to send a letter to your community if you serve a specific constituency.
I love it. I got an email from Amy Sample Ward at the Nonprofit Technology Network today. Did you get that email that said, I want to give you a hug? And I almost cried. I thought, oh my gosh, I want a hug so badly. So they wrote, we've got you. We see you. Here's some resources. We don't have all the answers, but we are committed to you and we're here for you. I thought that was such a beautiful letter. Just a really, not having to have perfection, all answers, but just saying we're here in community together and this is what we're doing. And that's really what I wanted to do today with this LinkedIn Live. So Bethany, thank you. Any last thoughts
No,
before
my
we
last thoughts are just
burn everything to the ground, or no?
no.
Are
Well,
we not?
maybe, but
Are we
last
just
thought
screaming and
is
we're screaming at midnight tonight? Maybe.
we're all just going to scream into the void together. I want to remind people who are really in this fight, take breaks, pass the torch to other people, take care of yourself. Remember, put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can help others. I think that's just sometimes as nonprofit people, we sacrifice ourselves and our families and our own health. Don't do that. There are lots of people working on this. Find the helpers. If you need to step back, do that for yourself. Don't feel like, yeah, there's no cross to die on here. We're all in this together. That's my final parting words.
Yes, I will post links for everyone to connect with Bethany in either in the show notes of the podcast or in the comment section. SnyderStrategies.me, Bethany Snyder on LinkedIn. And you can obviously all connect with me on LinkedIn, but I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're so busy. There's a lot going on. This was a nice little reprise from looking at the news.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for having me on and lifting this up. Like, we need to be having these conversations over and over again.
Over and over and over again. I completely agree. All right. Well, have a great weekend, and I'm sure I'll have you on again very soon.
I hope so. Everyone stay safe. Take care.
Take care, everyone.